Good morning, Adrian. How are you today?
Yeah, not bad, Pete. Thank you. Not bad at all. Yourself?
Yeah, all right, thank you. It's a bit of a grey Monday morning here in deepest West Sussex, but it looks like the sun's trying to get out.
Yeah, good day. Good day for a fireside chat. Really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If only I'd lit the fire. Okay, so we're going to talk about threat and risk assessment in the context of preparing for red teams today. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's following our last discussion on red teams themselves. So I think threat and risk analysis, although some people may think it's a very boring subject, actually, what we're here to do today is to actually dispel that their myth.
Yeah, too right. It's I used to give lots of talks to rooms full of auditors, and I would say to them something like, "Yeah, lots of my friends are auditors. Lots of my friends are traffic wardens too. All of you are doing an essential job, and nobody likes you." And it's the same with threat and risk analysis as an activity. Everybody has a preconceived idea about it, but actually, the going through the process as well as the outcomes is, I find, with many clients, quite a surprise for them, a positive surprise.
Yeah, and I think so. And again, if any good business, be they small, medium, large enterprises, organisations of any sector, there is always an element of threat and certainly risk analysis that people identify with, and generally people try to perform them at least once a year,
Yeah.
which is a scary concept, but we'll follow that lead in a bit. So I think let's start off with what, in your terms, Pete, is Tara?
Right. Okay. So when I first came up with the concept, as you would expect, I took it from lots of different areas, a lot of existing methodologies. But my objective was to create not really a tool so much as a mindset with some guidelines to help businesses understand where the threats to their business are coming from. Well, not necessarily business, of course, any organization, but where the threats are coming from in terms of the threat actors. People typically have huge amounts of preconceived ideas about this. So it's always worth having an educated third party introduce the key areas of threat actors, the groupings, and explain and discuss with the client why those threats might be threats to that organization. And by threat actor group also what methodologies they might use, what techniques they might use to try and achieve their objectives. And as an output at the end of the process, what we hope to achieve if we're using Tyra for red teaming is a scenario or a set of scenarios that are like storyboards that describe how an attack might take place from the most dangerous or the most likely or both threat actor, and understanding in that scenario how the steps progress, what the threat actor is trying to achieve, and the steps they go through to achieve that. The idea being, of course, as we discussed in the last session, to exercise both the protective controls, the things that people usually think security is about, and the detective controls, where we hope that they're able to spot the attack while it's in progress, if it's got through, and minimize the impact on the business. But importantly, in a good Tara exercise, we go much broader than just what people think of as cyber. Any threat to the business could be considered, and it doesn't have to be an IT-based threat. It could, of course, be something like a CEO exploit by telephone, or a senior person who's tricked by telephone to make a transfer of funds to another party that they shouldn't. And that sort of attack isn't cyber, is it? It's just social engineering. Or it could be a group of activists who have an axe to grind with a particular organization and want to gain access to the building to steal real product, or to in a pharmaceutical environment to attempt to liberate animals that are being held for experimentation, or to have a placard demonstration in the car park. There's a whole bunch of things that can affect what I would like to describe as business resilience, not cyber resilience.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point to make. Whereas a lot of companies concentrate on the risk side of analysis, and I will go back to the point I made earlier of it's an annual exercise that people like to update their risk register. Unfortunately, people think of that singular fact and singular exercise as just that, a once a year piece where they think, oh, okay, what are our greatest risks? Oh, I put this in last year, I'll just update the list.
Yeah.
And it's very much a very linear spreadsheet. People are not thinking about the risk side of things. When people think about red teams and exercises, they think of cyber, they think of IT, but they don't think of the bigger picture and the context to what their threats are to their business as a whole.
Yeah.
Classic example, I was with a client just a few months ago where there was a lot of protests going on outside, lots of red paint being flung around in that Savile Row area. And one of the protesters had got into the building's lobby. Security hadn't seen them get past and obviously get into a toilet space, and they activated an alarm. And obviously that caused a fire evacuation. People were all out on the streets, where then there was a lot bigger kerfuffle going on, because that's what the protesters were after. They were after all those financial sector people coming out of those buildings so they could actually target them, so they could throw paint at them and then infiltrate whatever they wanted to do and disrupt the business. Yeah. And again, those sorts of things can lead certainly to a lot bigger threats. It isn't just about the threat of the cyber in that case. It is the threat on the people themselves. It is a threat to the building itself and using the building's facilities, like your fire alarm settings, like even smoke alarm settings. I've seen where people can set off bits of paper light just to set off those smoke detection systems, and using that building's facilities against the companies that are housed within them to be that greater threat to the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I talk about Tara, what I'm talking about is the entire business as you described, and trying to identify the most significant threats against that business. And what a lot of people, I think, don't realize is that may include, for instance, accidental threats from their own staff, from their own procedures, from their own equipment even. Something like, let's say, software update that automatically rolls itself out and causes continuity problems for the business operations. So it's a very wide remit, and our job in a really successful Tara session is to boil that down to the really important elements, whatever that means. That's understanding those threat actors, whether they're deliberate or accidental threat actors, to understand the impact on the business, the potential impact. And that, of course, then depends upon understanding what information inside the business is critical to it continuing to survive and prosper. And that's something else that comes out of these sessions. So this is, I suppose, why I really promote this as an entry point for businesses who haven't thought about the bigger resilience picture in detail. It highlights for them in discussion, not just threat actors, which these days most people have heard of, but identifying which threat actors might be the most important to the business, but also understanding the preparatory work that organization needs to do in order to be able to understand what the impact might be. So where's that information kept? Who uses it? How important is it to day-to-day running of the business? How important is it to the growth and prosperity of that business? who has legitimate access, who might have unintentional, inappropriate access to it, how is it protected, what detection controls are in place so that someone is alerted if inappropriate access is achieved, how do they respond to that? It's a huge picture, and one initial workshop can really get those juices flowing, get the thoughts in progress for that organization, and help them start to see the bigger picture of how to protect themselves and grow the business in the 21st century.
Absolutely, but as we've seen in the past, that one session that can certainly activate the neurons in people's business acumen and their consideration of risk. And again, you touched on a very good point there about the accidental risks, which are very prevalent in a lot of the organisations that we work within, and a lot of people. Schools, particularly, I'm thinking of, do seem to do a lot in terms of that risk assessment as such on a day-to-day basis. But sometimes the very linear thought patterns of those risks and the writing of those reports on that daily basis needs challenging.
Yeah.
And that's what we're here to do. Certainly, when you go into an organisation in a first run red team, after you've done that TARA exercise, preceding the actual initial red team, it does awaken those managers and those executives to what they should be doing amongst that. But then when you start and you come back and you revisit then a next TARA exercise and a next red team, they are then surprised that they haven't covered all the bases, that because they've based their thought patterns upon that initial red team TARA.
Absolutely.
And so to challenge consistently along a process of not only annually but biannually and during irregular timings, I think is a far better way to get the point across of that threat and risk to any organisation.
Well, when we were talking earlier privately, one of the key points you made was this thinking outside of the box. And I think, no blame for anyone, but any organisation of any sort always ends up thinking like the defender because they're defending their business. And, whether it's a software developer or someone designing building access systems or someone in HR looking after staff, it doesn't really matter what the role is. They end up thinking within the box because of the controls and the procedures and the training that they know about. As soon as a third party comes along who has a sort of, I'll say hacker mindset, but that might put the wrong spin on it. It's really a life hacker mindset that will look at it and say, but what if this happened? And what if that happened? And yes, okay, you've got, for instance, going back to IT because that's where I live and that's how I think a lot of the time. If you've got, let's say, a big ERP system on a somewhere either in the cloud or on premise on big computers, yada yada, and access via a desktop, then the designers and the users of these systems think access has to be through that desktop. But of course it doesn't. What a hacker will think is, what happens if I connect myself directly onto the network and try and talk to the server without going through the client software? You get a whole different picture. And that same model is easy to apply to buildings. So, you might have tremendous defenses around the front door, but what about the back door that's held open with a fire extinguisher so people can go out with a cigarette or, that sort of stuff. So I think thinking outside the box is one of the key things that a good TARA workshop leader can bring and help the business challenge itself.
Oh, that reminds me of the days where when you used to still be able to smoke in your server rooms, and in the argon-filled server rooms and the shutter doors that used to come down, the cigarette bin that used to be wedged in the way, so that you could make a better escape without being trapped in the Argonfield server room. So that is another element of risk to that. But show me age now. But
yeah,
it's very interesting. Yes, that we do cover a lot of that health and safety element of that, and it's not just about the buildings, it is about the people, it is about your customers that could be on your site. There are so many different elements to it, and it takes outsiders to come in and spot those threats and then deal with them, because as you say, the people are too used to the day-to-day running and day-to-day sort of blue team style defensive posture.
Yeah.
That they grasp with that. And it's not just about red team in this basis. Again, we talk very loosely these days about the white hats term and hacker mentality, and as you say, life hacker mentality. But we have to look at it from that multicolored spectrum of whoever we are, be it blue, be it purple, be it white, be it red. And really take that open-minded approach to make sure you can see the bigger picture.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think one of the key things that I've discovered over the years is that as we run more threat and risk workshops with people, it becomes obvious they don't really understand what threat and risk is. People get very confused between a threat, a vulnerability, an asset, and the word risk, and how it all links together.
Okay, let's dig into that a bit more then. Shall we understand a bit more what a threat is?
Yeah. Okay. Well, a threat can be absolutely anything that typically exploits a vulnerability to get to an asset. It's 1, 2, 3. Threat is the what we call a threat actor. It can also, of course, be something inanimate, but anyway, threat actors are easier to understand. Threat actors have an objective. Now, if it's a malicious threat actor, their objective might be the theft or the destruction or the encryption of information, for example. Something like ransomware. Now, the ransomware itself isn't of course, an entity. It's a piece of software, but the person who launched it is the threat actor, if you will, and the threat source. The vulnerability means that the threat can somehow gain access to its objective. So a vulnerability to ransomware, for instance, might be staff who aren't sufficiently alert and trained and knowledgeable to be able to spot, let's say, a phishing email from a real email, and they click on something and disaster happens immediately after. That's a vulnerability. The vulnerability could be the person. More likely, it's a combination of the individual and not enough clever software assisting the individual, not proper procedures written to help the individual, and information inadequately protected, because if it was really important information, maybe it should be ring-fenced a bit better.
Or let's think outside of the IT box a minute, and you're just talking about an unlocked filing cabinet, even where someone old school has gone in, then can look at a piece of information, take a picture of it on a phone or whatever, and then they have that information. There is no detection system around that then, because the vulnerability has exposed that paper record to the actual threat actor.
Yep, exactly. Perfect. And, you know, I'm as soon as you started that little example, my brain's going, okay, so vulnerabilities would be in, you know, controlling building access, challenging unbadged visitors, securely locking filing cabinets, having CCTV around very important data. Loads of ideas come to mind, and those are the sort of things that would come out in a workshop, aren't they? And it just not only gives that basis for example, a red team exercise, I think equally importantly, it educates everyone in that meeting room about how to think about these threats and vulnerabilities, and that in turn gives them a better perspective on risk. And of course, a third party can come in and run a meeting like that, but that's no good unless the members of the organization present help tailor the thinking to what they already know about their own organization, their own business, their marketplace, their sector. And one more point on that: when people engage someone to do a pen test, a penetration test, they'll get if it's not a brilliantly executed one, they'll get a nice thick report that has little in the way of context for their business. And while something might be flagged up as a critical vulnerability in a web server or a critical vulnerability in a building defense system, nonetheless, is it really critical for that business in that sector today?
Yeah, may I add another caveat to that in the fact that even if it is a very thorough penetration test, if it's not targeted enough in the right manner, and as you say, this is what the threat and risk analysis drives towards, if it's not targeted in the right area, there could be so much in that penetration test that you don't know what is going to be the highest risks and the medium or the lowest risks to that organization, because there may be so much in there that there is no way on earth that any organization is going to be able to afford to lock it all down.
And by the way, although every pen test report I've ever read says these are your risks, they ain't. They're your vulnerabilities.
Yes. Again, massively important point.
Doesn't expose risks; it's exposed vulnerabilities.
Yeah, the amount of people who ask us for just penetration tests without any thought beforehand of what they need to analyze in terms of those threats and risks. Yeah. And again, so I take all that into account. Where does the accidental piece fall into it?
This is something that, well, in the end, every report you read from, the big guys who produce lovely annual reports every year, the largest percentage of problems for business that impact them financially or reputationally come from accidental problems, like an employee accidentally exposing information, or maybe someone setting the wrong permissions on a resource, or it's just behavioral problems. And these are the problems that businesses struggle with, because the only solution really is changing or improving the employee mindset through a ton of education, not training, education. Light the candle, don't pour the facts in. And that's a real issue. So what we would look at there, I suppose, as an example, is we'd hope in that TARA meeting that there would be, let's say, an information asset register available, or at least someone with knowledge of what the key information in the business would be. And then to talk about how that's used day to day. And from that, again, using the thinking outside the box mindset, how might that information leak out? Usually for really good reasons. An employee, let's say, a classic would be they want to carry on working longer hours than they would normally. They want to put it on a USB stick or on a laptop or into a cloud share somewhere, a cloud drive, and work on it remotely from home or while they're traveling. And these are classic requirements at every level in the business. And they're not given any training or awareness or even process and procedure to help them do that in a fashion that doesn't make that information vulnerable. And if it's vulnerable, then of course you've got a problem.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible point there. I think, only to back that up, where a lot of organizations do commit to health and safety audits, certainly on an annual basis, and they take a lot of stock from those health and safety audits. Why don't people do more in terms of those TARA exercises on their cyber estate?
It's interesting, isn't it? I think I don't know. It's a cultural mindset that just seeps into people who have normal jobs, unlike me, and that means that that they don't connect the dots between something like health and safety, business continuity, cyber security. They're siloed in their minds. And the processes associated with each of those areas are therefore also siloed. And whilst organisations like the Bank of England and the PRA in those sectors are trying to encourage businesses to combine these into large exercises that help really test the health of the business from all perspectives, it's a real battle. And unless it's applied externally like that from a regulatory authority, I think most businesses are too busy trying to make a living, and they don't think that way.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the only element that we have in terms of enforcement on that side of things in this country is the Information Commissioner's Office or the UK Supervisory Authority. I think probably they don't bare their teeth enough in this country, and their remit is really only around that data protection element of it. Possibly there is an argument for the NCSC playing a bigger part in that, and maybe that's what the new security laws that are being discussed may cause more of a requirement for that.
Yeah, I guess so. And in the end, I think there's three schools of thought. One is, and there's probably room for all three combined in some way. One is regulatory or legal, which forces an organisation to go down a particular path. I can't say in my personal experience that encourages enthusiastic adoption of a particular mindset. It becomes more of a checkbox response. Another is commercial pressure. In any private organisation, private sector business, then commercial pressures are very effective in changing business responses and attitudes, as are the social pressures that are enabled through financial stuff. Like if you're a business to consumer business, then if there's a particular growth in a particular mindset in the community, then you'll tend to move towards that. And the third is the inspirational appeal to survival. If business is understood, and this is a very personal opinion, but it'll make it not true in my mind. If business is understood that the most effective way to make them competitive, successful, and able to grow is to do this sort of exercise, then they'd lap it up. The problem is that it's in the mental camp of, audit and security and stuff that the board or the senior management may think of as boring or just has to be done.
Yeah, I mean, I think, describe a lot of what we do in terms of brand protection in a lot of ways, and it goes back to what we were saying in the last episode of what we do, certainly on the Tara side, prior to any red team exercise, is certainly look at the behavioural analysis of an organisation, and it looks at not only how people behave in it, but how the organisation portrays itself at times as well, which relates back to the whole brand reputation piece. And any damage to that brand's reputation costs any organisation money. And I think that's where it comes from. One other point I think I'd like to make on this side of things, when it comes to even regulation or certainly certification and standardization, I've read a lot recently in terms of ISO 27001 reports on organizations. And then we've looked at what we consider to be Tara exercises within those organizations. And one point I think I'd like to make on that basis is that although certainly ISO 27001 is a great standard, and it's a good certification for people to have on that security side of any organization, it is not a panacea. Usually people meet the criteria that's required within the actual standardization and certification, they tend to tighten up on those in the once a year revisit of that certification when they're re-audited. But again, they don't think outside the box on those things. And we've walked into quite a few organizations, I think, recently, and seen a lot more flaws in the way that they're performing their security than is just contained within an ISO 27001 report or audit.
Sure. I think if you pursue something like 27001 as a certification, as a badge of honor, if you like, something that you want to be able to flaunt to people and say, look, we're good at security. In the ideal world, that would come about naturally from doing the processes right in the first place in order to help the business have a platform from which to grow and be successful. And that's not connected in most people's minds. Any business really I've ever spoken to, if you like, whether it's 9001, 27001, or any of the other certifications, those are about, marketing people say it's great they can have the badge, but they see it as a separate project, has to be done to achieve the badge. That's not a healthy approach for a business that wants to really succeed.
No, protection is a mindset. It's not a process-driven beast. Sure,
exactly so. And I think, if businesses were able to be exposed more to that outside the box Tara thinking in regular workshops, it would change the mindsets of the people present. I've seen it happen, where they become much more aware and released from the confines of the programming that they developed over the years for themselves in their role. And they can just, like we do, if we go into a new situation, we're naturally looking for the threats and vulnerabilities. Just, whether it's going shopping in Tesco, or whether it's designing software, or whether it's building a house, it doesn't really matter. In my mind, those things are always there. And, whilst some people don't like that idea, they don't want to be thinking about threats and vulnerabilities all the time, it leads to a safer and more successful life, in my experience.
It does indeed. It's been fascinating, Pete.
Yeah, really good chat. Thank you. It's a real pleasure, as always, to talk to you, Adrian, to hear your perspective and to share mine. Great stuff. Thank you.
And you. Maybe next time we should do a fireside chat, seeing as it be very, very near Christmas time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. I'll go and collect the wood now, shall I?
Excellent. Just don't invite Val Doonican.
Showing your age again, my friend. Okay, you take care and we'll speak again soon. Huh?
Bye-bye.
Bye.